Joining us now from Boise, Idaho, Senator Jim Risch, ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Bret. It's good to be with you again.
Senator, you just heard Deputy Secretary Sherman. Let's start with Iran and what's happening with that deal. What's your sense of this?
Well, you know, Bret, sitting here listening to this, I feel like the administration is living in an alternative universe from where we are. I mean, I heard Wendy try to excuse the Iranians that, well, they didn't really intend to shoot it at our embassy there in Iraq. What else were they shooting at? They fired 7 missiles out of Iran into Iraq that hit near where the new construction that they're doing on an embassy there. I mean, this is nonsense. And then it sounds like it had exactly the effect that the Iranians wanted. They fired these missiles at a U.S. installation, and now Wendy is saying, "Oh well, we need to get signed as quick as possible." I mean, that got them exactly what they wanted. It sounds like to me. This is nonsense.
Is the administration briefing Congress about where they are on that deal?
No, they're not. They promised they would. They haven't. Look. They know they're out of touch with Congress. It'd be nice if they would brief us, but this was an awful deal when it was made the first time around. What we're hearing, and we're getting only leakage. It's going to be worse this time than what it was. Now, you got to remember what's happening here. You got a room that the Iranians are sitting at the table. The Russians and the Chinese are in there. They don't even let the U.S. delegation in that room. They're sitting at the kids' table out in the hall, peeking through the keyhole to see what's going on. So you got the Iranians and the Russians negotiating a deal for us. I mean, what could possibly go wrong here?
But you can't do anything about it, right?
This is surreal.
You can't do anything. Republicans can't do anything about it on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, there's no question about that. They refuse, just as the Obama administration did, to submit it to Congress as required by the Constitution to be submitted as a treaty. If indeed it was submitted as a treaty and we voted on it, there would be a deal. There is no deal. Even if the Biden administration signs, they have what's called an executive agreement with Iran. It will not last past the next Republican president that's elected, just as the last deal didn't last the minute that the Republicans took over. Look, if you're going to get this done, everybody needs to get together on this, and we need to have a deal that is livable and a good deal. This isn't even close.
Okay, let's turn to Ukraine. How do you stop Vladimir Putin without starting World War III?
Well, there's no doubt that you always have to keep in mind that you don't want to escalate to a direct confrontation with Russia. I wouldn't call it World War III. I think if the thing did get away there, I think it'd end pretty quickly because with the conventional forces that he's had there, you know, we haven't seen this kind of ineptness in a long, long time. So I'm not as concerned about that. I think you always have to be wary of that. But look, the administration has projected weakness throughout this. It's been too little, too late from the beginning. You remember everything that we've tried to do, they said no, and then eventually they say yes. And that started with the sanctions. It started with giving them Stinger missiles. They said no. Then when our allies stepped up and gave Stingers, then they said okay. The same thing with the Javelin anti-tank weapons. They said no. Then when our allies stepped up, they said yes. They're just dragging their feet. Look, when you're dealing with these people, if you project weakness, you're going to have a real problem. That's going on with both Iran and with Russia right now, and it is a serious situation. We need them to project some strength.
Senator, there are some in your party who think that some of these sanctions are having a reverberation on Americans in the middle of the country, and that we need to have kind of a cost basis analysis for what we're doing before we levy these things. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, we've been doing these sanctions for a long time, and there is collateral damage sometimes from the sanctions, but the sanctions are usually not broad blanketed. They have what are called waivers in them where you can put them on surgically. But you always have to be concerned about that when you're putting on sanctions, that you're not shooting yourself in the foot when you do it. This is a delicate operation, and it's watched very carefully. It is not painting with a broad brush. It's not shooting with a shotgun. It is very targeted, very much shot with a rifle and not a shotgun.
You know, there are some former military folks, generals, who have written an open letter now to call for a no-fly zone. It says, "We, the undersigned, urge the Biden administration, together with NATO allies, to impose a limited no-fly zone over Ukraine, starting with protection for humanitarian corridors that were agreed upon in talks between Russian and Ukrainian officials on Thursday." Is that feasible, or is that too dangerous and crosses the line where you're going to have confrontation?
Well, it's feasible, but there are dangers involved with that. Look, this is another thing that we've been pushing the administration on for some time. The Ukrainians can pretty much put up their own no-fly zone if we supply them with the SAM missiles that we have, that the allies have, the surface-to-air missiles. Look, remember, the Russians do this. They supplied it to the eastern Ukrainian breakaways, and they brought down an airliner with it, as you remember. They brought down a Malaysian airliner some time ago, and the Stingers are too light. They only go to about 15,000 feet. They're not quite fast enough. They do some good. The Patriots are too big. They're, you know, the launch system's about $5 billion. Each shot's about $1 million. But there's a lot of stuff in between that are intermediate that the Ukrainians could use to inflect their own no-fly zone, particularly in the west part of the country.
Senator, you voted against the omnibus.
I did.
And in there is the aid for Ukraine. So you're talking about aid going into Ukraine, but you voted against that. Defend that vote.
Yeah, well, the problem, if it was just that straight-up vote, this would have been an absolute no-brainer for me. I support that 100%. I have. But the other pork that they had in there, the numerous other things, for instance, there's a piece in there that most Americans don't realize. It brings back earmarks, for crying out loud. We fought for years to get rid of those earmarks. In addition to that, there was some gun legislation that was included in that a couple of the gun lobbies were very much against. There were some provisions in there that a number of the pro-life group were against. Whenever we have these doggone big bills, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, whether you vote yes or no. But I hope that no one would take this as not being a support for the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian war.
Senator Risch, we appreciate your time. I have to leave it there.
Bret, always good to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Up next, they